Let's dig a little deeper on how President Trump is dealing with the media uproar over his son, especially now that most of the briefings have been moved off camera. I spoke earlier with Ari Fleischer, the former White House press secretary for George W. Bush and now a Fox News contributor from Connecticut. Ari Fleischer, welcome.
Thank you, Howard.
Good to see you. When the New York Times goes to Donald Trump Jr. and says, we're about to publish your emails, and we'd like to have your comments, and then he preempts the paper by posting them on his Twitter feed, what is the fallout from that?
Well, the fallout is pretty tough because what newspapers and media have an obligation to do is go to a source and say, we have info. And that way they can have a story that includes your reaction to it. And that's good for people on my side, the communicator side of the podium. But if you then take that and preempt the media, next time the media needs something from you, they're going to call you 10 seconds before they have to file their story. They'll get your quote and they'll hit send, and that doesn't help you in the long term.
Right. As a matter of White House damage control with the press, something you have some experience with, how damaging is it when, in the case of the president's son, his first statement, the first White House statement to the New York Times said, well, it was a meeting primarily about adoption. And then the second statement says, well, we were told that this Russian lawyer, had some Oppo information on Hillary Clinton. That was the pretext. And then on Friday, NBC reports there was another person in the meeting, who happens to be a former Soviet military counterintelligence officer. How does that help the White House case to have it dribble out like that?
This is a classic case of how not to do it. The lesson that Bill Clinton's White House taught everybody how to do this was that when you have damaging news, get your arms around it yourself, put it all out in its entirety, and do it yourself and do it on day one. Instead, the Trump White House did the exact opposite. They are the ones who stretched the story out from a one-day story into at least a 4 or 5 day story. And so I just don't understand the White House thinking that they could keep those additional details secret. Surely they should have learned by now the press is never going to stop digging.
Right, and there are a lot of leaks in this government, and eventually these details would leak out, so get out ahead of it yourself, turn it into a 1 or 2 day story, as you say. This whole question of the way this story about Donald Trump Jr. has oozed out came up at a briefing the other day with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Take a listen.
Sarah, I want to ask you, the drip, drip, drip is undermining the credibility of this administration.
I think it's actually undermining the credibility of the media because they drip, drip, drip a lot of things that don't seem to have much to do about nothing.
Undermining the credibility of the media, not the White House, when the story comes out piece by piece by piece?
Well, here's the core issue, and that is how significant is this meeting, or is it not significant at all? And Howard, I would say to you, as somebody who's been critical of the Trump White House and of Donald Trump Jr., how they've handled this, unless and until there is evidence that Donald Trump or his campaign collaborated with Russia on the hacking of the Democratic National Committee emails or Podesta's emails and or worked with WikiLeaks on its dissemination, that's the collusion that is the damaging collusion. This meeting was bad judgment. It should never have been done. It was foolish. It was an opening to Russia that nobody should open to Russia. But I don't see the crime in the meeting. And that's, right, I think, the distinction that the White House wants to make here. I think it's a valid distinction.
I'm not saying
it doesn't forgive them having the meeting.
Anything illegal, but it does not look good. I think we can agree on that. Now, you may have noticed that that was an off-camera briefing by the Deputy White House Press Secretary, as somebody who stood at that podium many times. They've now moved most of the briefings to audio only. They seem not to want the televised briefings. Now, that may cut down on grandstanding by TV reporters. I'll grant you that. But does it also inhibit the administration's ability to get its message out?
Well, former Press Secretary to Bill Clinton, Mike McCurry, and I have long advocated taking the briefing off of live TV. Let the cameras be in the room, but embargo it all so you cannot use any of it until after the briefing is over. The purpose being to tone things down so it's not such a red-hot TV show. And frankly, I think everybody in Washington needs a tone down. Everything is so fast, so furious, so dramatic, so breaking news, so red-hot. And that's not what the country wants out of Washington. And so taking the briefing off, downplaying it to some degree, is good for the body politic. It's good for the White House. It's good for the press corps. And it will take time, though, because this White House is still pretty red hot.
Right.
And so the issues are hot. But I think still it's fundamentally the right thing to do.
I've got half a minute, Ari. You, some years ago, worked as a contributor at CNN. President Trump, as you know, constantly bashing CNN as fake news. Do you buy that assessment? Fake news?
Well, I think the media makes a lot of mistakes, and that's how I phrase it. If I see somebody do something wrong, I say that. I do think the mainstream media, Howard, is largely liberal. I think there's no question about that. It's so much easier to be a Democrat dealing with the mainstream media than it is to be a Republican.
And Ari Fleischer, you would know from your years of service in the Bush White House. Ari Fleischer, brand new Fox News contributor. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Howard.